Hey guys, it's Tammy coming back to you with my MCU recap of Agent Carter Season 2. This one was a long one. It was 10 episodes instead of 8 for the first one. And there's a lot of stuff for me to report, so I'm going to get right into it. But before I do that, let's do some housekeeping. Make sure you like my videos, you share my videos because sharing is caring, and subscribe and hit the bell. Hit that bell and make sure that you're notified every time I upload a new video. Let's get started. So, season 2. I have to refer to my notes because, again, this was not my favorite. Wasn't my favorite show. Season 2, we started out with you see Agent Carter walking into a bank, her famous hat, her little blue dress, and then suddenly you see that it's Dottie. So Dottie is robbing the bank. She's trying to get into a vault. The vault has something significant in it, and Agent Carter arrests her, and Agent Carter and Agent Thompson, I believe, they arrest her, and they take her in, and they find out that the vault that she was trying to get into had this pin with this A symbol on it, and they wanted to know why that pin was so important to her. They interrogated her. Well, Agent Carter interrogated her, and she wouldn't really say anything. So that's kind of how it starts off. And then you see palm trees, and you find out that you're in LA. And Sousa is meeting a new detective. He's shaking his hand, and the new detective, is telling him that there's a serial killer on the loose. What he does is he freezes the lake or the body of water, and it freezes around a woman. So they pull out a block of ice, and it has a woman in it, and it's the hottest day of the year in California, and they're trying to figure out how this even happened, but only like part of the lake was actually frozen. So but Sousa is talking to the detective about that, and they're kind of, comparing notes or whatever. And then we're told that Sousa, by Thompson, Chief Thompson, that Chief Sousa, because now he's a chief in California, wants Agent Carter to come there to help with that case of the lady in the lake. So she goes out to LA, and Jarvis actually picks her up from the airport. So, which is nice to see Jarvis come back. So we have Agent Thompson, or Chief Thompson, I'm sorry, Chief Sousa, Agent Carter, and Jarvis. They are reintroduced into the story. So we have those team players that were already there before. Carter and Sousa go and visit the coroner, and the lady that was in the block of ice is frozen through and through. So there's no part of her that is blood, flesh, whatever. She is frozen all the way through. So, and her shoes are switched feet. So they're like, okay, this is the same guy that's been doing it, blah, blah, blah. They find out that the lady's name is Jane Scott. She works for a company, Isodyne, and Calvin Chadwick is the owner of Isodyne, and he has a close relationship with her. So, Agent Carter and Sousa actually find Detective Melzer. Oh, along with Detective Melzer, that's his name, they find the coroner actually frozen as well, because he's been working on this body, and they go to touch him and he breaks into a billion pieces. But it's like black ice. It's so weird. But we finally meet Mrs. Jarvis, which is nice. Her name is Anna, and she picks out Agent Carter's outfit for the Derby because Agent Carter's going to go to the Derby so that she can question Calvin Chadwick. So she threatens Mr. Chadwick to give him a list of his employees at the company, or she's going to get the list by any means necessary herself. So he's not real happy about that. And then his wife comes up and says some words to him, but we don't find her important until the end of the season. The other detective comes out and he goes to drink some water, and the water freezes over and he starts to freak out. So he thinks that he's the one that's causing the freeze, so he kidnaps one of the scientists. And the scientist that he kidnaps, I want to say, yeah, I believe it was Dr. Wilkes was the scientist that he kidnaps. But they also show us at the same time Chief Thompson is interrogating Dottie, and she won't talk to him because he's not Agent Carter. So he gets very upset about that, and he threatens to torture her, which, I mean, she's a Russian spy. She doesn't really care about that. Jarvis and Sousa find the stolen car that Detective Henry stole. That was actually the detective's name. And they follow the doctor's cards. The doctor that he actually kidnapped, which was Dr. Melzer. No, Dr. Melzer is the coroner. Sorry. It's Dr. Wilkes. So Dr. Wilkes is leaving cards. Agent Carter had met him before because she snuck into Isodyne. She acted like she needed to go to the bathroom. He pulled her into the office and kind of like started showing her this wine or whatever and had her drink some wine, and they kind of hit it off. The big part about that is that Dr. Wilkes is actually black, and this was like in 1974, I think. 1947, I'm sorry, 1974, 1947. So it's really unheard of for there to be a black scientist working for anybody. So, but they keep finding the cards, and they're following the cards to find Detective Henry. A cop shoots Detective Henry as he started freezing, and he broke into a gazillion pieces also. Meanwhile, the FBI takes Dottie into custody, and Thompson wants to know why. Dr. Wilkes tries to help the SSR figure out what the agent was killed, the agent that was killed, or who the agent was that killed Detective Henry and why he killed him. He also asked Carter on a date, which was really cute. And then we find out that the cop that shot the detective on purpose, and Calvin Chadwick and his wife paid the cop to do it. So, and it ends with Dr. Wilkes looking at some foreign matter changing shapes. So that kind of leads us to S.H.I.E.L.D. because I believe it's the same matter. They call it something else in this series. It's called Zero Matter. I can't remember what it's called in S.H.I.E.L.D. Once I start watching S.H.I.E.L.D., it'll jump back in my head. But so it's the same stuff that Daisy got sucked into, and she actually broke out of it. And the other chick, they called her Flowers because she wore a flower dress, and she actually got sucked into, but she came out and she was like deformed. She had like spikes out of her face and stuff. So episode 2 and 3 were basically Calvin Chadwick meeting with this council of 10, I think it was called Council of 9, and they were saying that they were going to shut down the Isodyne project, and they were going to go get the dead body of Jane Scott and take care of it. And they shoot the agents from the SSR that are loading her body into a truck so that they can take it somewhere, so that they can, or they're loading it from the coroner's office to take it to SSR so that they can check through it and try to figure out what happened. And they kill those agents, and before they are able to transport. Dr. Wilkes shows Peggy a very important video, and it shows the zero matter being tested, and they open up a rift. It's like a tear in space and time, and it engulfs all of the stuff, and then it just like explodes. So they were hiding it in Isodyne, and he actually got a copy of the video that they took of it, and like no one has spoken of it. So he was saying that that's what he was working on. He was working on that zero matter, and he found a way to contain it so that it didn't do the rift again. So we find out that Calvin Chadwick's wife is filming a movie. So she's a movie star. Her name is Whitney Frost, I believe is her name. So, we find out about her. And then the man that killed the agents is following Wilkes and Carter. Peggy watches the movie with scientist Wilkes, Dr. Wilkes. And then they went to Isodyne to steal the zero matter. Calvin's wife, Whitney, actually shows up, and she wants the zero matter as well. And they fight over it and drop it, and it opens up, and it sucks them in. And then it does the explosion or implosion, whatever you want to call it. So, they think, that Dr. Wilkes has been killed by the zero matter. Whitney's been killed by the zero matter. So then episode 3 kind of goes in where they search Dr. Wilkes' home to find the gun that killed the agents. And then Peggy's like, I think this was all planned to make him look like a horrible person and all of this other stuff. She kind of has a soft spot for him since he gave her wine and he asked her out on a date, and he clearly likes Peggy. And then Jarvis and Peggy visit Stark and show him the Zero Matter film, and he's like amazed by what's going on. Thompson shows up in LA, and he changes the story about what happened. And as Peggy walks out of the office because she's upset, then she goes to pick up her purse, and then like a stapler and something else starts floating, and she's like, oh my God, oh my God. And Sousa's with her, and Sousa's like, or Jarvis, it's either Jarvis or Sousa, and they're with her, and they're like, oh my God. And she's like, don't get too close to me because, I've been exposed to the zero matter. When it exploded, they were still by the building. She was by the building. So she was afraid that she was exposed to it, and that's what was causing the metal to float or whatever. And so Stark sneaks Peggy into the Arena Club, which is what that A was on the pen that Dottie was trying to steal. And where the Council of 9 would meet. And she finds a secret meeting room where the security, quote, security, follows her into the room, and she hides under the desk. They have these little things that she's supposed to put them everywhere and activate them, and it's like a homing device or a tracking device. And then for some reason, they're not working. So she has to nix that whole situation. Stark finds out that Peggy was exposed and comes up with a solution, sprays it into the air, and Dr. Wilkes appears. So now she's thinking, I wasn't exposed to it. Dr. Wilkes was actually following me around, and that's what he tells her that he was. And this gentleman, the security guard that has been following them, his name is Mr. Hunt. He sneaks onto the Stark property, onto the compound, and he tries to kill Peggy. And Calvin's wife actually kills the producer with zero matter. And that's when she realizes that she has the zero matter and she can do different things. So episode 4, it flashes back to actually when Peggy was a little girl and her mom said that she needs to be a lady and stop being so tomboyish. And then Whitney, which is her stage name, we find out, and her name is actually Agnes, gets a delivery of rats. She tries to hide it from her husband, and she's hiding this. The zero matter has made a mark on the side of her face. She's trying to hide that from him, so she keeps pulling her hair over. That's not why I'm pulling my hair over, but that's why she does it. And then it flashes back to Agnes, or aka Whitney Frost, when she was little, and she fixes this radio, and we find out that she's actually a scientist. So how she got into acting and modeling and stuff, we don't really know at that point. So we figure out why she's trying to get the zero matter, because she's actually a scientist. And then we flash back to, well, Peggy and Jarvis go to Mr. Hunt's house. They tranquilize him, kidnap him, and then Sousa finds out and wants in on the job. They flash back to Peggy getting placed in the field. As she gets engaged, her brother actually appears, and oh no, she's getting placed in the field as she gets engaged. She had just got engaged, and they want her to join the SOE, which I don't know what that stands for. I don't think they ever told what it was. Then they flash back to Agnes arguing with her mother, and her mother telling her that she was never going to do anything with her life other than be pretty, and that's how she needed to get through life. Hunt tells Sousa, which is the security guard that they beat up basically and kidnapped. Hunt tells Sousa and Peggy about the Power of 9, the group, which is the group of 9 or whatever I call them, and they're helping to get Calvin elected as a senator. And meanwhile, the Dr. Wilkes is seeing the zero matter on the blackboard and the rift opening. So he starts to get very nervous about what's going on with him. The man that Thompson gave the video to is the head of the group over the SSR. And his name is Vernon something. So we learn about him a little bit later on, but he threatens Peggy. And then they flash back to Peggy again and her brother. She's talking to her brother about her fiance, and she's at her engagement party, and her brother basically tells her that she should take the SOE job. And then they flash back to Peggy trying on her wedding dress, and then military men come and tell her mother and her father that her brother has been killed in duty. So and then Mr. Hunt tells Calvin and Agnes that he wants protection because he told Peggy what happened, and Whitney kills him with the zero matter. So that's interesting. And then they flash back to Agnes meeting a man that'll change her life, and then he changes her name to Whitney Frost. So you meet the director that sees her on the street and kind of changes everything. Dr. Wilkes wakes Peggy up and shows that the zero matter is calling him. The zero matter jumped into his finger, and then it tells him where Jane Scott's body is. Sousa proposes to his girlfriend. So he has a girlfriend while he's in LA, when he escaped to LA, basically. That's what everyone keeps telling him. He escaped to LA to avoid Peggy, and he proposes to her. Then Peggy and Jarvis, Dr. Wilkes, go to steal Jane Scott's body, but Whitney is there. She beats them there, and the zero matter jumps into her, and she tells her husband she needs to steal an atomic bomb. Whitney reaches out to her ex to help her husband because he was a criminal, and he can steal the bomb from the Roxxon, one of the Roxxon buildings. Yes, they popped up again. So Peggy and Sousa enlist the security, and Samberly, or the secretary, I'm sorry, I think her name is Rose, and Samberly, who is a lab tech, to break into the Roxxon building and to steal the atomic bomb inside parts. Jarvis gets locked in with the bomb, and Sousa has to talk him through taking the parts out of there. Peggy falls on a rod because they're in a building that's being reconstructed, and she falls on a rod. Sousa takes her to his fiance's house, and she helps her and, like, tries to stop the bleeding and all this other stuff. She looks into the room, and she kind of sees Sousa gazing into Peggy's eyes, and she gets really angry, and she basically breaks off the engagement because she's like, you're in love with her, and that's why you came from New York. So Dr. Wilkes disappears while he's speaking to Peggy, and that's really kind of crazy. But so Peggy, episode 6, Peggy kind of tells Dr. Wilkes to build a containment unit for himself so that he won't disappear. Meanwhile, Calvin calls a council meeting so that Agnes can show them the zero matter. But of course, he has something else planned for her. Peggy visits Dottie, and she gets her to agree to helping her get this zero matter because they need the zero matter to help Dr. Wilkes build the containment chamber. And since he built one at Isodyne, and they need her because Whitney doesn't know how she looks, so they want her to sneak into this party and basically get a blood sample from Whitney so that they can have some of the zero matter and build the containment unit. So Peggy and Sousa break Dottie out, and Jarvis and Dottie go to the dinner party, and then they realize that Thompson is at the party. So Dottie somehow ditches they have like a homing device and a tracker and stuff on her. She ditches all of that stuff and sneaks into the room where the council was meeting after she got the blood sample, because she bumped into Whitney or whatever, and she got the blood sample. She sneaks into this cabinet, and she listens to the council and watches Whitney kill most of the guys from the council, like right before her eyes. And then Jarvis frantically searches for Dottie. Thompson visits Peggy and threatens her. Well, actually, not Thompson. The other gentleman, Vernon, he finds Dottie, and they go after her, and then Thompson comes after her. He knocks her out. She drops the pen where the sample holder where she had it, and Jarvis actually finds it, and he takes it back to Peggy. So then Thompson visits Peggy, threatens her after finding out it's most likely that it was her that broke Dottie out. Jarvis found the sample and took it to Peggy, and then we see Whitney has been given Dottie by Agent Thompson, or actually not Chief Thompson, I guess is his name, but the other gentleman, Vernon, who's over the SSR. He's in some other group. Episode 7 starts with Whitney giving a press conference about her husband's death because she kills him because he tries to have them capture her after she kills some of the other guys in that group of 9 men. And then she holds a press conference about how sad she is, the death, you know, her husband's death. And then Vernon interrogates Dottie. He gets nothing from her. He's trying to use like crazy tactics and stuff and truth serum. And she's a Russian spy, so she's like, whatever. And then Whitney turns Dottie's necklace. Whitney sends him to get the rods that Peggy stole out of the atomic bomb, Vernon. And then Whitney goes to interrogate Dottie herself. So she comes down there, she's interrogating Dottie, and then she basically uses the zero matter to get Dottie to speak. Because right before it takes her over completely, then she talks about what happened. Whitney turns Dottie's necklace back on, and then Peggy gets the message. Peggy and Jarvis go to save Dottie, but they know they're walking into a trap, and get into a discussion about what they should do about her attraction to Dr. Wilkes and Chief Souza. Peggy and Jarvis get caught. When they break loose, Dottie tells them that Whitney is going to kill Dr. Wilkes. And that was actually the trap. It wasn't to trap them to come there. It was to trap them to get away from the house. Whitney tries to convince Dr. Wilkes to come with after she broke into Stark's compound. And he's in that containment chamber. She kidnaps him because he somehow becomes whole because the zero matter is unstable, and they knock him out, they kidnap him, and then Jarvis's wife, Anna, actually comes out and she says, Peggy's gonna keep searching for you until she finds you. You might as well just let him go, and then they shoot Jarvis's wife. So Souza gets beat up. Some guys come into his office or his home, and they beat him up. And he tries to go get Anna, because he tries to save her. He talks to her on the phone, and he knows that what's going on. So, episode 8, Peggy calls the SSR, and Vernon Masters answers the phone from the hospital. So she's confused and she's upset because she knows that something's going down. So then episode 8, we start by showing when Jarvis is telling Peggy about the ball to hold Captain America's blood, and Stark's new, and talking about Stark's new partner, Peggy Carter. So they're showing him talking to Anna about all of this stuff, and when he's talking on the phone to her. So they kind of go back to that, and then we're now in the hospital where Jarvis is losing it. He's just kind of losing his mind. Peggy offers to get him a change of clothes while he waits for Anna to wake up. Dr. Wilkes wakes up on the floor and is being studied and questioned by Whitney. She's asking him all these questions. She's trying to compare notes. Peggy and Souza go to see Whitney's boyfriend, Manfredi, I think his name is. Meanwhile, Thompson finds someone to find Peggy's file from the SOE in London so that he can frame her, so she'll stop doing whatever she's doing, which is not what they want her to do. Carter and team go to make the exchange of the rods for Dr. Wilkes because they come up with this idea. And Wilkes turns on Carter and demands to know where the real rods are. And they say the SSR, and Whitney calls Vernon to get the rods from the SSR. So then he uses this brain scrambling thing on Chief Thompson. This is a long one. I'm sorry, you guys. A gamma ray, and then Thompson goes with Souza and Peggy after he wakes up and he realizes what Vernon had done to him, he goes with them to get the uranium, which is what was in the atomic bomb. They are too late as the rift is already open and it brings in Dr. Wilkes. And then they use a gamma ray to close the rift, and it actually spits Dr. Wilkes out, and he's the first person to ever come back out from the rift. So, Rose, the secretary, is with Mrs. Jarvis because Jarvis doesn't know if he's coming back. Jarvis shoots Whitney because she shot his wife. But she lives because she has that doggone zero matter in her. And then they take Carter and Jarvis hostage. And then we start back at the SSR, which stands for Strategic Scientific Reserve. I made sure I read it this time because it was only 2 seasons and I wanted to make sure I had it. Where Peggy's in black and white. And then it got kind of weird because this is episode 9. It got kind of weird. Like they broke into like a Broadway show and they were dancing and singing and basically telling her that she needed to figure out who she loved. If she loved Dr. Wilkes or if she loved, Chief Sousa and all this other stuff. And then she wakes up and she's inside of the truck that they drove to bring the gamma ray. She's inside, she's kind of tied up, and Jarvis is knocked out next to her. And we're almost at the end, people. 30 minutes of me talking. Woo! Vernon sends the SSR agents to kill Sousa and Thompson, and they trick the agents into just arresting Sousa, which while they're out there with the gamma ray. Just so that they can take him back and then they can figure out what was going on with Vernon. Dr. Wilkes wakes up and wants to get out of the car that he's riding in with Whitney and her boyfriend Manfredi. He's saying that he's feeling sick, he's not feeling well, and then his eyes were black and then they just turned regular. So they pull over because they do believe that he is actually sick, and then they check the truck and they figure out that that Peggy and Jarvis actually got out. So they circle back. They send their men to circle back to get them. Peggy, they beat up the guys. They take the truck. They drive it back to the SSR. Peggy walks into the SSR and just kicks Vernon's ass. Meanwhile, Whitney is trying to suck the zero matter out of Dr. Wilkes by any means necessary. So she has this huge needle just like stuck in his chest, and she's trying to pull the zero matter out, and nothing's coming out but blood. So her boyfriend tells her that maybe she needs to slow down. Thompson goes to speak with Whitney. Peggy, because they all come up with the idea to try to hit her directly with the gamma ray. So Thompson goes to speak with her, but then he kind of double crosses them and basically tells Whitney that he'll bring Vernon with him and then he'll leave Vernon there for her. So, and she can kill him or whatever. And then, and she can use the gamma ray to open up the rift. So Peggy and Sousa find out that Thompson has double crossed them, and they have Samberly build a remote so that Thompson can't detonate the gamma ray because he turned it into a bomb. And we only know that because he actually confided in Samberly and said that it was Sousa's idea. So Samberly actually turned the gamma ray into a bomb. So at the hospital, Anna demands that Jarvis go to help Peggy because Peggy demanded that he go to the hospital. And she says, well, I have a whole bunch of doctors. Peggy has no one, so she needs you. And so he tells her, I think he told her that they can't have children anymore, which the doctor had already told him, but he hadn't told her, Anna. Peggy goes to rescue Wilkes. He tells her to run and he locks her out of the room that he's in. Meanwhile, Thompson tells Whitney to take care of Vernon, but when he tries to detonate the bomb, he finds out that Samberly must have told Carter, and they jammed up his detonation thing. And then he gets to the car and he pleads his case that the bomb can kill them all. And Peggy's like, no, we don't want to kill Dr. Wilkes. We want to save him. And he's like, why? He pointed a gun at you. And, and she's like, he's a good man. It's just the zero matter that's acting, that, is making him act like that, and blah, blah, blah. So Thompson points a gun at Samberly and tells him to turn whatever's jamming the signal off. And Peggy threatens to shoot Thompson, but then they all get knocked down anyway, and because there's like this big explosion, and we find out that Dr. Wilkes actually went into the room with Whitney and he explodes. So he explodes into a gazillion million pieces, and then the zero matter is everywhere, and they actually find him, and he's fine, but he can't walk very well, but he has no more zero matter in him. So they're trying to get him out. Whitney gets up. She's following them out. It absorbs all of the zero matter that was in Dr. Wilkes as well. They get out. They go to the car, and they get out and go to the car. They hit they hit Whitney and just leave her there. They get in the car, their cars, and Stark is there, and they all leave. Then Manfredi, her boyfriend, goes to speak to Stark because they're actually friends, but he acts like he's holding up Jarvis. But he goes to speak to them, to Stark, Jarvis, Peggy, and Wilkes, to help him get Whitney out of her room so that they can do whatever that they need to do with the zero matter, because he doesn't want to deal with it anymore, and because he loves her. And then he goes to her to have her help him beat up one of his guys, and she goes downstairs. They sneak into the room and they take pictures of everything, and then Sousa goes back and he changes one of the numbers so she can mess up her scientific equations. And then they sneak back out as she's coming upstairs, and she tells him, she doesn't want to be bothered anymore. She has to finish this, and she has to figure out how to make the rift. So they create a device that can open the rift, and they go to Stark Studios and they open the rift there, and they know that Whitney will feel it. And immediately she opens up her eyes and she's like, oh, she starts smiling. So she goes there. They zap her with the gamma ray. It separates the zero matter from her and goes into the rift, and then they arrest her. Then they need to close it, but the device that they have to close the rift is jammed. So Sousa, and they have another one that you have to do manually, and it's like a crank handle, but you have to be within the blast radius of where the rift will suck you in. So Sousa ties herself to a pole with a hose, a garden hose or something, as he's doing the crank, and the garden hose comes loose, and Peggy runs. She grabs the end of the hose so that he doesn't get sucked into the rift. Everybody's grabbing, and then they're like, yeah, the only other way that we can close the rift is if we blow it up from the inside. Jarvis goes and gets a hover car from the Stark lineup of cars, Howard Stark's cars, and they put the I think the uranium inside of the car, and then they basically light the car, ignite the car's gas tank with a towel or something, and they push it, or they have it hover into the rift, and it explodes, and then the rift goes away, and Sousa is saved. So that's pretty much the end of it. Dr. Wilkes goes to work for Howard Stark. Whitney is shown talking to Calvin, and you're kind of like, what? He already died. Like, she sucked him in. And then the scene kind of switches to an asylum, and she's actually talking to the window. So she's not really talking to him. Jarvis takes Peggy to the SSR, and Peggy finally kisses Sousa. And then at the very, very end, they show Thompson actually talking to someone on the phone, and he's like, oh, Peggy's taking another vacation, blah, blah, blah. He's packing to go back to New York. He's like, oh, I guess I'll be riding by myself. And somebody's knocking on the door. He opens the door, and they shoot him, and they go and look through his suitcase, and they find Peggy's file, and they take it. So since there's not a season 3, I don't think we'll ever find out what happened with that file. I personally think it was S.H.I.E.L.D. So that, or maybe Stark sent somebody to get the file. I don't know. I don't know exactly how that worked, but they took the file, and we're not going to hear from Agent Carter anymore. So by the time we hear from her again is in Civil War, I think, when she dies. Like, she's old and she doesn't quite remember what's going on, and she dies. So that was the end of Agent Carter. Thank you for bearing with me for almost 45 minutes. I hope I haven't bored you too much. Remember to like my videos, share my videos, subscribe, and hit the bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. But that is the end of Agent Carter's recap. I will see you next time for the recap on Iron Man 1. So until then,